When I learned of what happened with my nieces, I broke down and cried. And I couldn't even be there for them because it was hush hush and nobody told me the truth.
As far as recovery and damage control, you just feel like the burden and the weight falls on you to like help. So Chad was the one who was like setting up the Megyn Kelly thing to try and like get it to where TLC would be cool with like moving forward with this show.
Hey everyone, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. It's Tuesday, June 6th, 2023. And I thought that I would give you some like behind the scenes backstory that I have not shared on this channel, and it might help provide context to the series Duggar Family Secrets, Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets, and Jim and Bobby Holt's role. There for years was a lot of people around the Duggars that knew that Jim and Michelle Duggar had a secret. They knew that their oldest son, Josh, had done some pretty awful things. And there was a lot of people, adults, mandated reporters, and individuals around them that were quiet for years while the show was on the air. Even though it was an open secret and hundreds of people knew because of their involvement in a church, it managed to stay under the radar until 2015. 2015 was when an explosive article came out by In Touch magazine, which outlined a police investigation into Josh Duggar. That catapulted sort of this series of events where Jim Bob became desperate to continue to sweep it under the rug. But that behavior by Jim Bob had been decades in the making. And he had been working very tirelessly since everything came to pass in the very beginning, where you start to realize that all he was doing was following the same script and following the same trajectory and following the same path as he had for years. He was doing anything and everything possible to move past what was happening, to make it less than and minimize it. And there was a lot of people along the way that helped him do that. Now, Jim and Bobby Holt appeared in this series, and they talked about their role and participation in a church that the Duggars had back in the early 2000s. Back in the early 2000s, Jim Bob and Michelle and Bobby and Jim Holt, and a group of families, they had this like small church that was sort of like a home church. And they met mostly at people's houses. A lot of times they met at the Duggars. And this was before the Duggars had their big house that they live in now. And there was a number of different families that were a part of this. And as this situation unfolded and more people learned about the situation, tense arguments actually broke out between Jim Bob and other people in his church about what was going on with Josh. So obviously the series kind of highlights that Josh was sent away once, and that's actually not entirely accurate. He was sent away once, and that was to the IBLP's headquarters or the IBLP training center in Little Rock. But he was also sent to other places like a friend's backyard where he lived in a RV or a shed and dug out sludge of a pond all by himself for a month or maybe two. He was sent away a third time. And each time Jim brought people in from the outside to help navigate because the people at the church didn't agree with how he was handling things. Jim Bob and his friend Jim Holt did go to a friend named Corporal Hutchins, who is now in prison, and they had Josh confess to him in 2003. Now, Corporal Hutchins was a really bizarre choice because he was an off-duty police officer that did car inspections, Arkansas State Police. So the state police are in charge of monitoring and inspecting used car lots. And so over the years, Jim Bob had gotten to know Corporal Hutchins. And that day they decided to go see someone that they knew. Jim Holt claims in this docuseries that he found out later that Corporal Hutchins was a friend of Jim Bob. But Jim Holt actually told me over the phone that he knew who Corporal Hutchins was. And he knew that he was an off-duty cop that did inspections on cars. Jim Holt also worked for Jim Bob at the car lot, which is something he also didn't mention in the series. Going to this person that they know is not going to turn Josh in seems like kind of a cop-out and just a way to sort of like report without really reporting. And years later, after nothing comes of it, things get worse because Josh's behavior escalates and people learn that he's done worse, right? People at church learn when a letter is found in a book. Kaylee Holt wrote a letter after her dad told her about what Josh had done. She wrote she wrote the letter to an author of a series, stuck the letter in the book, forgot the letter was written, and then loaned the book out to a friend from church. That friend from church then found the letter and she gave it to her parents, and then her parents shared it with another woman at church, and that woman is the one that sort of put everything in motion. That woman who eventually reported the Duggars to the anonymous hotline. Before that happened, there was a huge explosive fight between Jim Holt and Jim Bob Duggar. So when all of this was going on, it's late 2006. Jim Bob is also in the middle of all of this, being hit up by TLC that they're interested in doing a series with him. And people are concerned because, one, this news is still like literally just breaks out, and the girls haven't gotten any help. Josh hasn't gotten any proper help, and people are concerned about Josh being around their kids and not having it reported to the proper authorities. And during a church meeting, things got so tense because there was a group of people at the church that wanted Jim Bob and Michelle to report them. There was a group of people that did not want them to. And that group of people were IBLP people. So there was I was told Dodie Murphy and Debbie Query and some of the leaders at the IBLP that got involved at this time, as confirmed by both Jim Holt and another elder, that Dodie came in to sort of facilitate some sort of reconciliation, and he decided that they didn't need to report Josh and that Jim Bob should do the show. Dodie Murphy was next in, he was a high up in the IBLP, ran the Russian training center for a while, wrote curriculum, and he has his own problematic history. Well, there was a huge fight that broke out, and apparently Jim Bob and Jim Holt got into a huge argument and were screaming at each other. Now, I was told the story by Jim Holt and another person, and then a woman that was at the church. So 3 separate people have told me this story. And basically what happened is Jim Bob got really angry because Jim Holt was pressing him that they hadn't done enough and it was time to turn him in to a different authority. And Jim Bob was angry at Jim Holt, and he was telling Jim Holt, allegedly, that Jim had a lot of room to talk and wasn't one to be on the king of moral authority. And what Jim Bob said was he knew that Jim Holt and Bobby had been intimate before they got married, and that Jim was 19 and Bobby was 14. And so Jim Bob was trying to say to Jim Holt, what you did to Bobby is the same as what Josh did. Even though Bobby was 14 and Jim was 19 and Josh was 14 and the kids were much younger than that, it's really not the same. But weirdly, under the law, it would be the exact same charge. And Jim Bob, being the sleuth that he is well aware of what the possible ramifications for Josh would be if he were to be reported. And so he's telling Jim Holt, apparently, this would be the exact same. You did the exact same thing because he's looking at like the charges, like it would be SA in the second degree. And it would be because Jim was 19 and she was 14, even because the age of consent is I think 16 or 17 in Arkansas. Back then it was too. And they eventually got married, and now they're separated. And it was still wrong back then. And Jim addressed the fact that he started dating her when she was 14, and he made comments about how she was developed, which I thought was really strange, because I was like, Jim, why would you even bring this up? Because it's not illegal for a 19-year-old to date a 14-year-old. They just can't sleep with them. I'm not trying to minimize that age difference, but I was 14 and 15 dating guys that were that old. Not to say it's right or justified, and now when I look back, I think it's kind of creepy, but it happens at that age a lot. But it doesn't happen when a guy that age actually puts the girl, and I mean, at that, there's such a significant age and maturity level at that point that there's reasons why laws are in place. In the state of Arkansas, statutory is 3 years of difference in age. So he was 3 years older than her when this happened. And so Jim Bob knew this, and Bobby actually told me about this. She said that Jim Bob knew that we had been intimate, and he would use that against Jim Holt, my husband, and he would say that Josh and Jim were the same and that Jim had no place to talk. And so they apparently were screaming and yelling at each other because Jim Bob didn't think that it was appropriate for Jim Holt to have any place to talk. And so apparently Jim Holt screamed in front of everyone and said, let's go. Let's go to the police station right now. I will confess to what I've done, and I'll see what they say. And then Josh confesses to what he's done, and I'll see what they say. And I'll ask them if it's the same. By this point, the statute of limitations for Jim Holt are well over, and nothing would have happened anyway. And he went on to marry Bobby. The creep factor is still there, but in Jim Bob's idea, he used that as a weapon against Jim Holt. And so Jim stayed silent for a long time because Jim Bob would use things like that against him. So that fight actually exploded the church, and they sort of split off at that point. The Holts sort of go their own way, but he's still on Jim Bob's radar, that he keeps Jim Holt close enough where he makes sure that Jim's not talking publicly about him, but far enough away that he's out of the inner circle, but not far enough away that he doesn't still trust Josh to spend time with him, because Josh goes and moves down with him to Little Rock for a while. Josh helps him on his 2010 campaign. The Duggars donate money to the 2010 campaign for Jim Holt. In 2014, Jim Holt is gifted a piece of property by Jim Bob. So Jim Bob was doing his job to keep Jim Holt quiet. Jim Bob and Jim Holt were not the only people in that room that day. And what I find the most interesting about that situation is that Jim Holt and Bobby knew for years, and they didn't do anything. Their loyalty to the Duggars and the fact that Jim Bob was using things over Jim Holt's head, and then not to mention Jim Holt's behavior towards Bobby and the kids was well known in this community. And so there was a lot of reasons why these guys went out of their way not to report it to the proper authorities. All of these people, a lot of them had their own skeletons in their closet, and that Jim Bob was willing to use things against people. So he would try to threaten people, allegedly, that, if you do this, I'll do that. And Jim Bob knew everyone's secrets, and so people were afraid of being retaliated against. What the most interesting part of the story to me is that there was a lot of people in the room that day. There was a lot of men in the room that day. Not one of those men actually called police. Not one of those elders that met for hours about Josh made the right choice to contact authorities. It was a woman. A woman who has been identified in court records, but I'd rather not say her name because she's really just been under the radar for such a long time. I'd hate to out her right now. But that woman confronted Jim Bob because she had been a child like Jill. And she had gone through something with her grandfather or someone, and her parents did not protect her. And she was going to make damn sure that that didn't happen to the Duggar girls. And so she's the one that called the police. Not any of those men that were at those meetings, not any of them. Not even Jim Holt. So Jim Holt and Jim Bob fight, scream, yell. Jim Holt is on this docuseries and he's like, yeah, you know, we reported him to police and they just gave him a stern talking to. Josh told them what we believed to be all that was true at the time. Now, when he said that, that's actually a lie. Josh told them, according to Corporal Hutchins, when he was interviewed when he was incarcerated and interviewed about what happened, according to his own records, Josh told him it only happened once, and he was very vague about what he had done. When Josh confessed to Jim Bob and Michelle and to Jim Holt and Bobby, he told them what he had done, and he said that he had done it more than once on multiple occasions, and he described in detail what happened. And when they go to see Corporal Hutchins, he said it happened one time. So Jim Holt wasn't honest when he said that. He also wasn't honest when he said that he didn't know who Corporal Hutchins was. He did. And he benefited by going to Corporal Hutchins because I'm sure Jim Bob in his mind is like, you tell Corporal Hutchins what he's doing. Now, I don't know if Jim Holt confessed to them. I don't know. I doubt it. But it's a safe place to go for all the parties because they know if Jim Holt knows if he goes and Jim Bob turns him in, Corporal Hutchins isn't going to do anything. Jim Bob knows that they're going to go to Corporal Hutchins and he's not going to do anything to Josh. So it was like a safe option for all of them. I was talking to an elder a couple weeks ago, and what they had told me is that in the years since all of this has gone through and gone on, a lot more has come out about that church group and why there was such a failure to act by so many different people. And mind you, there was people that literally walked into the mess and they were just literally trying to get their heads above water and didn't know what to do and how to act and were just being sort of like deer in headlights. And then there was other people that knew the Duggars a lot, like the Holts, and didn't do anything. The elder said, I found out recently that two of the fathers that were also involved in this church had also had histories that involved minors, and when they were either young or an adult. They didn't go into specifics, but they said, being that Jim Bob held things over the head of Jim Holt, there's no doubt in my mind that he would have done the same had he known that about those guys. So those guys had reason to keep quiet, allegedly. So they're surrounded by a lot of really creepy men doing really bad things, I guess, And so you're like, they're in a culture where all the men are protecting men. And there's a woman that out of the blue comes out and says, like, no. And then they go to the police and nothing happens. Because that report they made 3 years before had never been reported, and the statute of limitations of the time that the investigation opened had expired. I cannot believe that's even a law. I can't believe that Jim Bob and Josh got out of that. And Jim Bob and Michelle were never charged with trying to cover it up. So Jim and Bobby Holt said a lot of things in the series. Another thing they mentioned about was the betrothal between his daughter, Kaylee, and Josh. When they were 14 years old, they allowed their daughter to be committed to marriage. That's a heavy thing to put on a child. And they basically arranged it. I mean, Josh, yes, approaches them, but it's an arrangement between Jim Bob and Jim Holt. And even after all of it, they still helped Josh. And they still interacted with Josh. And they let Josh move in with them. Bobby testified in the evidentiary hearing that Josh lived with them in Little Rock. But then she clarified at trial that he lived at a dorm. I think she realized that it looked and sounded a little bit awkward for her to agree to allow him to live with the family given his history. So my experience with Jim Holt and Bobby was that a lot of our conversations were truthful in what Jim, Bob, and Michelle did, but they were not always truthful in what they did. And they were trying to constantly minimize their role in it because obviously it didn't look good that they helped Jim Bob. And then the question becomes out of all of that is, why did they speak up now, right? They knew for 20 years. Why did it take Josh to get arrested for them to speak up? They didn't speak up in 2015 publicly. They didn't say anything when the allegations came out publicly back then. So why now? I'll never understand all these people that had silence. And even if they had skeletons in their closet, isn't it more important to do the right thing to protect girls than to care about your own stuff? Yes, but Jim Bob and Michelle surround themselves with people with shady histories, knowing full well that they will be able to get away with things, in my opinion, because they all have skeletons in their closet. And when everyone has something to lose by doing the right thing and going to police, no one's going to do anything. And that's why so much gets swept under the rug. And that's my experience and my opinion of what I've seen in this group. A lot of people not wanting to deal with their own bones in their graveyard and allowing things to go uncharged, unreported, because they know that Jim Bob will report them. It's a boys' club and it's gross. A lot of survivors are asking for like criminal acts and like they want this organization to be taken down from a criminal level, and it's like, I don't even know how that would happen. So many of these people have not reported things to police, and they all protect each other. It makes it impossible for anyone to get justice. So that's why Josh's conviction was such a big deal. But Jim Holt and Jim Bob fighting about it, and if Jim Holt would have revealed that in the series, would it have changed your mind about what he shared and what Bobby shared about their involvement? Tell me what your thoughts are in the comments below. Bye, guys.